Hello and welcome to the Attorney Post, where we bring you the inside baseball scoop from top legal experts across the country. I'm your host, Justin West.
All right, and we are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to the Attorney Post, where we discuss what's going on in various facets of the law with lawyers who are at the top of their game to help you navigate the ins and outs of various legal fields and jurisdictions, because, as always, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Today, I'm joined with Paul Traina, and he is an attorney with Panish, Shea, and Boyle out on the West Coast, and I have it on good authority that they're one of the largest injury attorneys in the United States. They have some incredible successes, some incredible victories for their clients, some billion-dollar settlements even, and many, 8 and 9 figure $1 million settlements just looking at their website. So we're going to have a really interesting conversation. He's been in some really high-powered cases, so I'm excited to introduce him. So hi, Paul. How are you doing today?
Hello, how are you?
Doing good. Thank you. So let's jump over really quickly and take a look. First off, this is the law firm that Paul is representing, Panish, Shea, and Boyle LLP. You can visit them online at psblaw.com. That's psblaw.com. And as always, we will have links to their website, etc., in the show notes. So feel free to go down there and take a click. Before we begin, as always, we're going to do a read and from one of our sponsors. Our first sponsor actually is for injury attorneys. Whether or not this works for Paul, I don't know, but you guys are probably familiar now. You've heard it many times if you're regular listeners. Our first sponsor is at injuryattorneyleads.com. If you're an injury attorney, you know that finding clients can be an expensive process. Most lead companies can charge hundreds of dollars for leads that simply fill out a form, and that's it. It's up to you to verify that the information is correct and to chase them down and get them on the phone. Oftentimes, it can take 10 leads or more in order to gain an actual client. The solution is injuryattorneyleads.com. Injuryattorneyleads.com has people reaching out to them across the country. Once they fill out a form, which is where most of the lead generation companies start, or where they stop, that's where injuryattorneyleads.com is just getting started. They reach out to every person who fills out a form and re-verifies their information on the phone before live transferring qualified individuals directly to your law firm. That means that the individuals that they transfer to you are guaranteed to be people who have been in an accident and who want to speak to a lawyer about their case. You can be sure that these potential clients meet your criteria for a qualified lead, and close rates average above 60%. Set up a time to talk with a client generation specialist by visiting injuryattorneyleads.com and scheduling a time to talk. That's injuryattorneyleads.com and clicking into the buttons and scheduling a time to talk. All righty. And so here is Panish, Shea, and Boyle LLP again. You can see some of these amazing victories right here. And I am joined again with Paul. So Paul, again, welcome to the Attorney Post. Thank you for taking time to be with me today. Paul is he graduated from Pepperdine University in 1991, and he actually began his career as a defense attorney at Harrington, Foxx, Dubrow, and Canter. And he did work on personal injury and product defect cases, trying 5 cases in his first 4 years while at that firm. Now he focuses with Panish, Shea, and Boyle on large-scale litigation, personal injury, and wrongful death cases. In fact, I have it on good authority again that their firm usually doesn't even handle cases that are under $1 million. They tend to be the big players. They're the ones that other attorneys will call in when they've got questions or they want to know they need a pinch hitter, they need someone else to help. I could talk about all sorts of things. He's won major settlements for his clients, including $1 billion in 2008. It's part of a legal team with a natural gas case out in California. Another $1 billion settlement. It resulted in $1 billion settlement after a 6-week trial. $10 million for somebody who suffered burns from a gas leak, $7 million for somebody else in a securities fraud case, etc. I'm really excited to talk to Paul because he's got a lot of experience. So Paul, first questions first. I gave a little bit of a back view there, but I'm sure I missed some things. So what did I miss?
I don't think you missed a lot. I think one of the things that is interesting for me anyway is when I started I came out of law school in 1991 and I joined a defense firm. And now I'm on the polar opposite side because now I'm on the plaintiff side. And what is really kind of neat about that is I first got the experience of being on the defense side and then now on the plaintiff side. But I think the first question that many people ask me is, how come you went from the defense and why did you go over to the plaintiff? I mean, that's a pretty big move. And the answer to that is after 5 years working on the defense, I loved the firm that I was working with. I loved the people. I actually like the clients a lot. And it was a different type of practice. You're representing insurance companies and you're representing self-insureds. And the reason that I came over to the plaintiff side is because I had a trial and I represented a automobile manufacturer at the time, and a plaintiff was hurt in the case. And I ended up going to trial and winning, getting the defense verdict on behalf of my client. And my wife said to me, and that also means that the plaintiff didn't get any money.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife said to me, gee whiz, Paul, if you were on the plaintiff side, do you think that you could have won? And it was a plaintiff where I had got to know because I had taken their depositions before.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I started looking at the plaintiff side and saying, well, gee whiz, should I change sides? And at that point in time, after 5 years, I made the switch and went over to the plaintiff side, which is a totally different practice.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I started out. And I wanted to represent consumers. I wanted to represent people that had been hurt and people that needed a lawyer. And so that's kind of how I started. And that's kind of where my passion is to help out people. It doesn't mean the manufacturers are bad people. It doesn't mean insurance companies are the bad people. It just means that I wanted to change my focus on what I wanted to do as a lawyer.
Right. So would you say as an injury attorney, you feel more like you represent the little guy?
I 100%. When I used to represent the manufacturers or insurance companies, you would go in there and you'd represent a company, and I represent a company. Now I represent people. People that have real injuries, people that need help. I figured that was the best use. I don't want to say use of my time, but it was something that I wanted to do. And when I first, when you first become a lawyer and you're applying to law school, one of the questions they ask you is, why do you want to become a lawyer?
That was actually going to be my next question for you. So what got you into law in the first place?
And if you go back and read that statement, everybody wants to be a lawyer because I think they really want to help people. And so that's what I wanted to do. And the best way to do that, I think, is to help people that really can't help themselves, and really navigating the legal world and what happens in court. That's something that we are qualified to do. So I wanted to help out people that have been hurt that can't help themselves.
Gotcha. And when did you know you wanted to be an attorney? Was that a late in life decision, or was that something that you just like always felt the call to do law, or?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. I really wanted to become a lawyer because I had a girlfriend when I was in sixth grade, and her dad happened to be a lawyer, and I thought, boy, he's a really cool guy. I think that's kind of what I'd like to do, without even really knowing what law was or what he did. Mm-hmm. So it was somebody that I kind of looked up to. So it was something that was in the back of my mind. And I think that's when I made the decision that is the path that I would like to go in life. So.
Gotcha. I looked at law. A lot of our longtime listeners know. I took a couple of the LSATs and the PLSATs, and I found the tests fun. I was a philosophy and history major, and so everyone's like, "What are you going to do with that?" It's a very marketable degree. You can ask the deep questions in life, like paper or plastic, or you want fries with that. And law school seemed like a good fit for me, but I ended up falling into marketing, et cetera, obviously, and I run my own company now. So I'm pretty happy with where I landed, but I always thought law was an avenue that fascinated me, which is one of the reasons I got into doing the podcast in the first place. It lets me talk to lawyers and engage with them, et cetera. What was your undergraduate degrees in?
It's funny that you say that, because I was actually a history and philosophy minor I also had a minor in political science.
Yeah, I had a minor in political science.
And I graduated from University of Minnesota. So, and at that point in time, they didn't have what's called a pre-law degree. So you're trying to kind of figure out what to do. So in any event, that was my undergraduate degree. But I knew at that point in time I wanted to get out of the cold in Minnesota. And that's why I came out to California, because the weather was a lot nicer. And that's kind of how I started, and then applied and got into Pepperdine and had a great experience there. So.
Awesome. So you've been practicing law for a good long while, 91 to 2001 to 2011. So 30 years now. That's quite the career in law. I'm sure you've experienced in the last year some really big changes that nobody really saw coming down the pike because of COVID-19. and of course all of the responses. And I'm given to understand that the responses in California have been a little more severe than other areas. I live in the middle of the country in Kansas, and so we've been a little more laid back. I think our governor was actually the first to cancel schools, though, so I think she wanted to jump on the bandwagon there or whatnot. How's the pandemic and the response to the pandemic affected you, both in your practice in general, and how's it affected your clients? How's it affected, the process of litigation, et cetera? What's your beat on that?
Well, I'll tell you what, my first feeling when the pandemic hit, and I think kind of all hit us around March of last year, was what are we going to do? And it's not just what we were going to do, but what is the United States and everybody going to do? And at that point in time, you kind of felt like, oh my goodness, everything's going to shut down and the world is going to close and all of that. What has happened, these are some of the advantages, I think, if there's any advantages to COVID, is that, we started using as a firm, Zoom, and we would have Zoom meetings every morning with our team. We would have Zoom meetings every Monday with our entire firm would be on. And in a sense, now that we were required to use Zoom and to communicate, we've actually become a lot closer, and we've had the opportunity really to look at each one of our cases and use and almost communicate a lot more in the last year as a firm and as a team than we were prior to the time of COVID. Now, some things in litigation have changed. I used to go to depositions. I would be in person, and I would, be able to ask the person seated across from me all these questions. Now we're doing it via Zoom. So that's kind of a disadvantage, because I kind of like being with somebody and seeing the person across from me.
Read their body language.
And at the same time, instead of having to travel to depositions and get in the car and go there, you can prepare and you can be at home, and we're able to do it through Zoom. So I think that is an advantage. But I will say, after all of this, I think that it's nice for all of us to get back, be more personable, and to be able to see everybody at the firm again. But it has changed. And I think one of the things that we have to do as lawyers is that when change happens like that, we have to adapt. And certainly our firm is able to do that. And certainly trials have kind of come to a halt, and now they're starting to pick back up. So that is also a disadvantage of COVID.
Do you think we'll ever see Zoom trials?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. In fact, I think there are some Zoom trials that are going on around California and around the nation, and they're set up in the courtroom, so you're able, to use that Zoom capability. I do know that there are trials, and trials have actually gone forth in the last year, and the trial courtrooms have outfitted themselves so that they are COVID safe, and that the lawyers are there, they're 6 feet away, they wear a mask. That has happened in the last year or so, but now I think all of the restrictions are lifting. And we're going to be going back into court, and so I think things are going to pick up. Now everything's kind of crammed, so yeah, we're trying to figure that out in the system. So, but I think we're getting to where we need to be. We're getting back.
I was talking to an attorney a while back, and I just thought it was one of the things that really shifted the way I thought about the way Zoom is affecting that thing. I mean, I've heard really good stuff and really bad stuff. Like, the really good stuff is being able to really quickly process through a lot of hearings and a lot of depositions and stuff where it's not necessarily as performance based. But I think trials seem very performance based and very much based on being able to read the room. He said to me, a Zoom call will never be able to replicate when, on your side. So when the defense makes a claim that is false, and you can look over at a juror and look him right in the eye, and he can look at you, and that you both just like connected. Because obviously, I mean, we simulate eye contact here on Zoom right now. When I'm looking at my camera, I'm not actually looking at you now. So actually giving you the look is literally impossible on Zoom. So it's one of the things I've been kind of fascinated, but I hope that we just get back to normal in the very near future, obviously. But it's fascinating to see that we've been able to do this. I remember I I remember growing up and everyone talked about video phones would be the wave of the future. And I never really thought of a video phone as being a very practical device, but now we carry them in our pockets and have them on our desktops and everywhere. So, all right. So let's get a little more personal here for a minute. I'm a firm believer, and our longtime listeners know that everybody fails. I've failed. I've had multiple businesses tank, in fact. It's just life. But as long as you learn from failure, it's not really a failure so much as a slow burn success. So, Paul, can you tell us about a time in your practicing of law that you would consider a kind of a fail? It doesn't have to be like, oh, my client died or whatever. But tell us about a time when things didn't go the way you're expecting. Maybe it was the way that a judge made a decision. Maybe it was just the paperwork wasn't filled out correctly, and what it taught you and how you bring that wisdom that you gained through that failure to better serve your current clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that I feel about practicing law, they call it practicing law because you're always practicing. So you're practicing to try to be perfect, but you're just not perfect. So we've all had failures. It's always hard to talk about them. But one thing that as a lawyer, and especially from my standpoint, when I do fail, it means that my client is not going to be able to recover. And as a result of that, usually my clients are hurt very badly and have permanent injuries, which they're going to suffer for the rest of their lives. So those are kind of failures that occur where it just doesn't end the next day, and it doesn't end the day after that, and it doesn't end the day after that. But so every time I lose, I have that sinking feeling that is with me all of the time. Mm-hmm. And there are days that I forget about it, but there are days that it comes up, even if that happened a long time ago. But to answer your question, rather than a very general, broad explanation of how I feel, probably one of the worst feelings I had, without saying the case, is when I represented an 18-year-old boy who was working as a part of a lifeguard program, and part of that program he dove in and was paralyzed, and was paralyzed from the chest down. Oh wow. And it was one of those issues in the case where I took the case on, and the reason is because I believed at the time that the training program that he was going through certainly didn't account for the way that they were supposed to enter the water, which made it dangerous for him to enter the water that way, and the reason that he suffered the injuries that he did. It was a case that went on for a long time, and at the end of the case, there was a result where there was a verdict that found that the program didn't have any deficiencies, and therefore he was not awarded any money, any compensation. That was, I will say, a failure or a loss, and it's a loss that happened about 12 years ago. And it's something that always stays with you, because I have children, and I have three girls, and they're around the same age, and you realize that this is somebody that is going to live the rest of their lives and is going to be it's going to affect them for the rest of their lives, and they're not going to have the means to get the help that they actually deserve, and what is required. So, there's other losses that I could talk about. There's other victories that I could talk about. But certainly when something happens like that, it plays on you as a parent. Yeah. It plays on you as an attorney. And, those are the things that I take with me going forward. And I think that's what makes, our firm so successful, is because we care. Yeah. And that caring doesn't stop when the case is over. And what I mean by that, when the case is over, if you're victorious, we still have relationships with our clients. And when you lose, you still have a relationship with your clients. So it doesn't just end when the attorney-client relationship ends.
That's powerful. And I've not heard a lot of attorneys say that, the fact that you do keep that connection. But I imagine, I mean, you spend a lot of time working with this person over the course of, months or even years, depending upon the case. So you don't usually just cut something off like that. So that's pretty powerful. Well, let's put the shoe on the other foot. I'm sure you win more than you lose. Most attorneys I work with or talk to would say that's the case. And I'm sure you've done some pretty successful things. I read a couple at the top of the show, some of your really big wins. So why don't you tell us, Paul, about a couple of your biggest wins that you're most proud of? It doesn't have to be the number one moneymaker, the one that got the biggest settlement or whatever, but what are some of the cases you've litigated that you're most proud of?
I don't want to bring up specific names because there's some confidentiality issues, but I can give
Obviously
you
that's fine.
kind of an idea. We've represented people that have been involved in an accident. It ranges from a death in a case to personal injuries, which people can no longer. For example, one of my clients lost his leg, and he lost his leg. He was in an accident, and there was a big oil rig that pulled out in front of him. And he injured his leg very, very badly, went through numerous procedures in which they tried to save his leg, and they ended up not being able to save it. And so he came to us, and he goes, what am I going to do now? I'm 34 years old. I have a wife. I don't have a leg anymore, and I don't really know what to do, Paul. And so we sat down with him, and we told him what his options were, and what we would do for him. And those are cases that don't turn around quick. I mean, it takes a couple of years, and it involves filing a complaint and going through what's called the discovery process and taking depositions. And listen, big oil companies don't want to pay money. They don't want to pay money to people, so it's always a fight. But that case resolved in a very good way. And here's what I mean by a good way. Listen, we're never going to be able to get somebody their leg back. But what we are going to be able to do, and what we do as lawyers, is make sure that moving forward, that we can give them the best possible life that they can have without a leg. And that means taking care of them from a medical standpoint, so that they have all the medical and needs and any type of equipment that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. Number two, something that people don't want to talk about is when people are hurt, people go through a lot of psychological issues.
Mm-hmm.
And those psychological issues don't end when the case is going on. They don't end when the case is over. So one of the things that we do is not only try to take care of them from a physical standpoint so they can get the medical care that they need, but also from a psychological standpoint, to make sure that they have the doctors and physicians that can take care of them from a mental health standpoint. And the last thing that we want to do is to make sure that if a person is hurt like that, is that we take care of them because they've had a loss of earnings. They're not going to be able to go out in the workforce maybe and do the same type of job that they were able to do prior to the time of the accident. So those are all of the factors that we take a look at, and we try to recover for them so that they're able to have a life that, hey, listen, it's not going to be as good as if you had two legs, but at least have the financial wherewithal so that they can do whatever they need to in the future and move forward. So, that was one of my bigger successes, because I saw somebody that was young, somebody that was hurt, someone that suffered permanent injuries, and somebody that we were able to get a very large settlement for that was going to take care of them in the future.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I love about injury law in particular is, and I know that some injury lawyers get a bad rap for a bunch of reasons. There's pejoratives that fly around, but at the end of the day, you're there to help people who've been injured. And in a sense, you level the playing field. I love the contingency-based fee model. Obviously, it does reward success on your part, but it also lowers the bar for entry for the average person who couldn't afford regularly hourly rates. And I think that's really crucial. I assume, obviously, you guys do free consultations and everything else. What advice would you give to somebody if they were injured and they needed an attorney? And particularly, what types of clients and injuries would be best suited for, say, Panish, Shea, and Boyle?
Yeah, I've kind of always said this about Panish, Shea, and Boyle, but I everybody that calls, we listen to their story, and we listen to how they have been injured. So whether when it ends up being a big case that we take or we don't take, we certainly take every phone call.
Mhm.
And what that means is this, and I think the best advice that I can give is this: somebody will look up our firm maybe and say, "Oh my goodness, they only deal with really big cases," and to a certain extent, that's true. However, when different people call me, and if it's a case that we are not going to take, and Panish Boyles is not going to take, the great thing that we have is a bunch of referral lawyers that we work with, that we send cases to, and that they send cases to us. So I guess one of the best pieces of advice that I would give is don't hesitate to call. If we can't take the case, we know some lawyers that will be able to take the case, but we'll certainly sit down and talk to you over the phone, and make sure that you're set up with the best possible attorney given the injuries that you have.
That's great to know that you've got a network of people that you work with, and you know, it's good to see camaraderie. It's easy to view other attorneys and other firms as a competitor, and I'm sure,
Yes.
and to some extent they are. But at the same time, when you can develop a symbiotic relationship, again, I think you mentioned in the pre-roll, I don't think we talked about this on the podcast, but your firm there, Panish and Boyle, is a really big one, and you oftentimes have other attorneys reaching out to you guys for advice or help on a case. And at the same time, when if you guys you have your schedule's just too full, or the case is just one that you can't take, knowing that you've got a great relationship with other attorneys that can fill that gap is pretty good. I don't know.
It's really great. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a little bit different from the defense, because the defense is kind of when you're in a firm on the defense, they are fighting over different cases and who their clients are. So I don't want to say there's not a lot of sharing of information, but certainly when I worked on the defense, we weren't calling a bunch of defense lawyers up and sharing information. On the plaintiff side, and especially with our referral network, lawyers are calling us, and we're calling them and referring cases back and forth. And that's what's important, is really making sure that each one of the clients that are calling, if they're not a perfect fit for us, to make sure and find them where they would be a perfect fit.
Gotcha. Can you tell us, obviously, I know you don't want to give away specific details, but what was a case that really surprised you, either in the details of the case or the discovery of the case or the way that it resolved? What's a case that really just kind of shocked you or surprised you?
That's a pretty good question. All the cases kind of surprise me, because you never know what's going to happen in a case. But I think the case that kind of surprised me the most, I had represented a janitor that ended up getting hurt, it looked like, on the job. And what ends up happening when somebody gets hurt on the job, that workers' compensation insurance usually covers everything, and there's no real third party that is involved.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular case, the gentleman was actually hurt on the job, but he was working in a building, and his employer had a separate entity that was also involved and owned the building where my client was hurt. What surprised me in that case, and it's not like a big case that ended up settling for a whole lot of money where people would say, "Oh my goodness," but I think kind of what surprised me a little bit is after we did some research, that we were able to get additional money for the client outside of workers' compensation, because we were able to find out that the entity where our client was hurt was actually owned and operated by another entity, which allowed us to bring a third party case against that entity. And so that was something that happened recently. And it surprised me, because I think when I first brought it in, everybody said, it's not, we can't do it. The lawyer needs a workers' compensation attorney, doesn't need a personal injury attorney like Panish and Boyle. And, just by doing a little bit extra research, finding out who the defendants really are, or whether the owner of the building also is incorporated differently, allowed us to go down a different path than a workers' compensation case would actually be. So that was somewhat of a surprise, and again, somewhat of a smaller type of personal injury case. But I would say probably the biggest surprise that I ever had was actually when I was working on the plaintiff side on a class action. And that class action involved what we call the fire and gas cases from in 2008 regarding the gas crisis, the electricity crisis, and we ended up bringing a class action, and we brought a class action against Sempra. And it involved at that point in time 3 big gas electricity companies coming together, and what we alleged formed an agreement which was illegal. And we were able to get, on behalf of California consumers, money back and credit back for gas and electricity of over, I think it was $3 billion, maybe it was 1.6 billion at the time. But just getting that result in such a big case, and that wasn't really a personal injury case, that was actually, a class action.
Consumer, yeah.
Yeah. So that to me, as a younger lawyer, because it happened a long time ago, was somewhat of a big surprise just because of the numbers that were involved.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are kind of some surprises, I guess, that I've seen.
Curious to see, I don't know if you remember this, about a month or so ago, Texas was hit with the incredible snowstorms, I guess, and apparently everyone's gas prices around the area got hiked like 10,000% or something. And I'm sure some of that's supply and demand and whatnot. I'm really curious to see if there's any cases that do result from that. It sounds vaguely related. It just makes me wonder if there's cases in the docket that'll come that way. So,
well, it kind of makes you wonder, because you wonder why these facilities didn't do the upgrade.
Yeah,
the upgrades in order for them so that they could operate to protect the consumers of Texas.
Yeah.
And so, that's kind of what you're kind of thinking in this day and age. You shouldn't be shut down because you have a snowstorm.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when people need the electricity and gas the most, right?
Exactly.
I mean, so yeah, I agree. That's one of the first things that also came to my mind when I saw that.
Oh, we'll see where that goes. Well, here in a minute, I'm gonna give you a magical wand, and with this magical wand, I'm gonna let you do a couple things. Let you go back in time and give young Paul a little bit of advice, as well as change something in the law that really frustrates you. So I'm gonna let you sit and percolate on that for a minute. But while I do that, I am gonna jump over and take a look at your site again, and then read from our second sponsor. So here again, psblaw.com, Panish, Shea, and Boyle. You can see their landmark cases here, victories and settlements. Obviously, you can request a free consultation. You can pick up the phone and call them at 310-477-1700. That's 310-477-1700. Obviously, they have a contact form, and they are fluent in Espanol as well. So if you guys are injured and you have especially a particularly big issue, and you're out in the California area in particular, though they do also work even in Las Vegas and the greater surrounding area, I would highly recommend working with Panish, Shea, and Boyle. And who knows, you may even get to talk with Paul. Our second sponsor for today is Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers. Are you a small business owner and you know that being on page 1 of Google is important, but you're afraid to work with a search engine optimization company because you know that SEO can be very expensive and very slow? Well, it doesn't have to be. Not anymore. Rocket SEO from hundreds of customers forces you to page 1 of Google safely and legally through the power of the news media. Rocket SEO utilizes national news media campaigns across a gamut of news sites that rank simply, instantly. With Rocket SEO, you can boost your website's ranking in Google in 1 week or less with a simple system that leverages the power of major media companies, news sites, and network affiliates of ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, as well as local news sources from the Boston Herald to the Sacramento Bee and all stops in between across the United States to put you on page 1 of Google in under a week, oftentimes 2 or 3 times on page 1 for dozens of keywords. To learn more, you can visit hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket or email press@hundredsofcustomers.com. That's hundredsofcustomers.com/rocket. All righty, we'll come back over here for just a minute. Got to get off the old screen share. There we go. So Paul, maybe not 6th grade Paul, maybe And obviously, I'm sure you give yourself some great advice, like buy Bitcoin and buy Dogecoin. we all love to go back and do that. I'm one of my listeners know that I'm bitter about Dogecoin because I had over 370,000 Dogecoins, and then Robinhood back in the GameStop stock thing, they froze my account and I ended up losing almost all of it because I was buying and selling, basically day trading it. So I'm kind of bitter. But that's a long story. But so if you can go back in time, and you've got the ability to give young Paul some advice as he's going into his burgeoning legal career, maybe as he's graduating from I was at Pepperdine in '91. What advice would you give young Paul?
I think, and I look at this two ways. I think the first way that I look at it, if when I was graduating, one of the things that I wish I would have done immediately is go right to the plaintiff side and start doing that type of work. I think I kind of got a little bit of sidetracked. And one of the reasons that you get sidetracked is because on the defense, that sometimes the firms will offer you more money. And coming out of law school, I didn't have any money and I was in debt. And so I think one of the advice that I would have given young Paul would be, hey, don't worry about the loans. Don't worry about any of that. The money's going to come. Start on the plaintiff side, because I think at heart, I've always been a plaintiff's lawyer, and I've always wanted to be somebody that stood up and represented what I call ordinary people. And so I think that's what I would have done. That's the advice that I would have given myself if I'm looking back on it.
Now, I'm kind of curious if you think that would have affected you, though, because I think it sounds like being on the defense at the beginning gave you some keen insight. Do you think that would have hindered young Paul in the end, or do you think it would have mattered?
Well, it's very interesting you say that, because when I first started, I said I really have two thoughts on this issue. The first was this is the advice that I would have given. But I'm one of those believers is that every little thing you do in life, even though it may look like the wrong path, actually sets you on the path where you're going to go in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think looking back on my path, what has made me the lawyer that I am on the personal injury side is the fact that I had these experiences, and these experiences being on the defense side, and the experience of dealing with insurance companies and manufacturers and working on the defense of those cases. Had I not had that type of experience, I don't know if I would have had the appreciation that I do now for being on the plaintiff side. And not only that, but that experience has really helped me be a plaintiff's lawyer, because you have an idea of what the defense is thinking and what they do. And the reason you have that is because you did it.
Yeah.
you were the one that actually was doing that and giving them advice. So I would have given young Paul advice like that, but I know the young Paul, he wouldn't have taken that advice. He would have kept doing exactly what he was doing, because he thought he had a better answer, put it that way. So I'm not sure that advice from an older Paul would have changed the path I eventually took.
Gotcha. No, it's an interesting answer. And it's interesting because, again, it felt like it conflicted with something that really did shape you. But again, that's just how it is. So, just give yourself the advice about the Bitcoin and we'll all be good, I guess. Yeah. So, okay. I'm going to give you a magic wand again, though. And this time I want you to change something that affects either you or your clients. I've talked to a number of attorneys, including injury attorneys in California. So I know some of the facets of the law there. And I know there's some things that are really frustrating, some things that are really helpful. And some of the things that frustrate are frustrations that you just deal with on a daily basis. I mean, it could be something as simple as paperwork that you have to submit that's really obnoxious. It could be something about a cap on medical mal or whatnot. But if you could change something about the law, it doesn't have to be in California, because I know that especially Panish and Boyle, it operates on a larger scale. But if you could change something about the law that affects you or that affects your clients, what would you change? And if you need a genie lamp, I can give you a genie lamp.
Well, I'll tell you what, and I think it's the most important thing that plaintiffs' lawyers deal with all the time, and that is the continuation of trial dates. If I could change anything with a wand, I would want a trial date within 8 to 12 months of the case being filed. And the reason for that is this. Number one, if we don't have a trial date, it's very hard to settle a case.
Yeah.
Defendants do not want to settle unless they have to settle. And if you have a trial date in place, the case is either going to go to trial or it's going to settle. Number one. Number two, clients are always, and deservedly so, complaining because litigation process takes a long time.
Yeah.
And the longer it takes, the more expensive it is. And then trial dates are always set a year out, a year and a half out. They get continued all of the time. So if I had a wand in our practice, I would say I would like a case to go to trial or to be settled within 8 to 12 months after being filed. And that is a wish that is never going to happen. I have cases right now that are, a year and a half, 2 years on, and we're still trying to get a trial date. And COVID certainly hasn't helped out at all.
Nobody's friend.
Yeah, I just think, the litigation process, I get that everybody, I get the involvement of the defense lawyers. I understand what has to be done, but I wish, if I had my wand, I would shorten that process because it's just very, very difficult for the clients. It really is when they have to wait so long.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I mean, the longer you offset, delayed justice is denied justice, as the
Exactly.
phrase goes. So, related question. I'm kind of curious. What's one of the longest cases you've worked on? Again, you give the timeline, you have to give the details of the case, but what case, or what's the longest you've spent, I guess is a better way to phrase that, on a case? Also, what's the shortest, like one that resolved incredibly quickly, faster than you thought?
Yeah, I've actually had a case. I haven't been working on it during the entire time, but it's a case right now that I actually have that was filed back in 2013. Oof. And it has went through the litigation process a little bit here, brought up on appeal, and then it got sent back down, and they got brought up on appeal again. And so now it's finally getting to a point where the case is set for trial in September. So that's just kind of you can get an idea of how long cases can go on if they're appealed and go through the litigation process. Now, that's one of the longest ones I've ever seen that is out there that's still on the docket. But I've had other cases where I was able to settle them within a month or so of the actual accident happening. And
wow.
that occurs in cases where we get the case early. We have a great client. We have injuries that are very clear, and that we make a demand to the self-insured or to the insurance company, and they get it. And meaning that, okay, we don't have to litigate this. The insurance company doesn't have to retain defense lawyers, and the best way to get it done is early. Yeah. And it's more efficient. And so I've had cases that have resolved within a month.
Nice. I mean, that's a great result for your clients, to be sure, and to make sure that they've got everything that they need to move forward. So, well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I think we've had a really good conversation today, and I've really enjoyed a lot of the wisdom that you've shared with me and with my listeners today, Paul. I do always like to give the attorneys I'm talking to maybe the last word. So is there any parting advice you'd like to leave our listeners with, or any final thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I think at the beginning of this, I never even said thank you for having me.
No.
It's been
not a problem.
Jason, it's very kind of you to set time aside and to talk with me. The only parting thing that I would say is this. Hopefully you never need a lawyer.
Yeah.
Nobody ever wants to hire a lawyer, because if they're going to hire a lawyer, they know that something has went wrong in their life. But I will just let you know that if there's any problem that you ever have, whether it's on personal injury or any other case where you need some advice, feel free to call, and you can call, and we will call you back. If we're not good in that area, if it's not personal injury, if it's not something I can handle, I will make you a promise, and that promise is I will find you somebody that is able to handle your case, or at least to give you advice.
That's awesome. That's one heck of a promise right there, too. Well, I have been talking with Paul Traina, and he is an attorney out there with Panish, Shea, and Boyle. Incredibly successful attorney, got his start in defense and went on to plaintiff law. I think we've had a really great conversation today. You've been listening to the Attorney Post. Again, we've been speaking with Paul Traina. Panish, Shea, and Boyle's website is psblaw.com. As always, we'll have a link to that and any other relevant information down below, as well as our show sponsors in the show notes. The Attorney Post can be found at theattorneypost.com. You also can obviously find us wherever you're listening to us right now. We do have a video stream if you want to see our attorneys that's available on YouTube. We also, of course, do syndicate our podcast wherever podcasts are found. You can find us on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon, etc. So we always do appreciate a like and a share. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. And until next time, remember, if you don't know your rights, you don't have any. Thank you guys very much for listening. And until next time, take care.